Did you know that the episode you are about to listen to is available on YouTube as a full multi-camera experience? Search for the Murder Police podcast channel on YouTube. Subscribe and see what you have been missing.
I can remember my first death penalty case, and it was with Ray.
Okay, yeah.
It was William Bennett.
Okay.
He was charged with murdering Judge Angelucci's son, Joseph.
Right.
And Joseph was serving a involuntary hospitalization warrant on William Bennett. And as Joseph was taking him into custody, Bennett got his gun and shot and killed him.
Warning. The podcast you're about to listen to may contain graphic descriptions of violent assaults, murder, and adult language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. Luana Redcorn, Part 1. The Role of the Commonwealth's Attorney. Welcome to the Murder Police Podcast. I am Wendy.
And I'm David.
We have with us tonight a very special guest, Miss Luana Redcorn, retired Fayette County Commonwealth Attorney. Thank you so much for coming to be with us this evening, Luana.
Wendy, thank you so much for inviting me, and you too, David.
No, thanks for coming. This is like a reunion to some extent of if we went down the road on the things that we did together back when I was doing your honeydew list as an assistant Commonwealth Attorney, we'd be all night. But I'm excited to have you. I think, like I said, people will learn what a Commonwealth's attorney does or a DA does in some detail. But I think the big thing we're going to be able to talk about tonight is your heritage with the Osage Nation. Am I saying that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Okay,
Osage
good deal.
Nation.
And especially on the heels of the movie The Killers of the Flower Moon and the historical knowledge that you have on that. This is a true crime podcast, and we can dive in and talk about some murders that were solved and unsolved and maybe why, which is probably just as more important. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Well, I guess let's start. I would like for our listeners to hear, Luana, how did you get involved in what you do or what you did, I should say, and what brought you to that position? Had you always had an interest in being a Commonwealth attorney?
Well, not always, but like any Commonwealth's attorney, I'm an attorney, of course, to begin with, and I started practicing law in 1984, and I was a public defender for a couple years before I became an assistant Commonwealth's attorney. But once I got a taste for criminal law and saw what it was like to be a public defender, which is a fine profession, and I really enjoyed that. I did that in Eastern Kentucky, but I had an opportunity to move to the other side to become a prosecutor. And so I applied for a job with Ray Larson in Fayette County, and that would have been in 1987. And he hired me, and the rest is sort of history for me.
Yeah, and we've had Ray on a few times early on when we first got started. And I just have to say, it was always an evening of laughs. There was always, after Ray would leave, we still were laughing about something he had said or done.
Well, I don't know that I'd call Ray funny all the time, but Ray was an exceptional person and certainly an exceptional Commonwealth's attorney. And, you know, when he passed away, that was a very tough morning. And I remember Luke and I sat down and composed, Luke is my husband, and we sat down and composed an announcement and announced on our office Facebook page that Ray had passed, and just had an opportunity to, in a few paragraphs, describe who he was. And he was a prosecutor's prosecutor, and in many ways defined for this state what a Commonwealth's attorney is. And Ray did a lot of incredible things in Fayette County that I think most people have no idea. And I'll just mention one of them. And I don't know where you're how many of your listeners are here in Fayette County, but there was a time when the only place you had to wear a seatbelt in the Commonwealth of Kentucky was Fayette County.
Oh, my.
When you got to the county line, you had to put your seatbelt on. You had to buckle up. And that was all the doing of Ray Larson.
I'm not surprised.
I'm not either.
Yeah.
And now the rest of the country has fallen in line.
Yeah.
Thanks to Ray.
Thanks to Ray.
No doubt. And you're right. He learned everything when he called himself Ray the DA. It was Ray the DA.
Ray the DA.
Yeah, for sure. Going back to the public defender thing, I think I knew that, but maybe not. When you did and let's get this straight too, is that I never shoot them down. We tease with defense attorneys all the time. But I think people who have listened to this show understand that there's actually a relationship there that's a lot of mutual respect at times.
Right. Well, we're all part of the criminal justice system.
That's it, in seeking the truth, right? So who can knock that? That's a big part of it too. When you did spend that time, do you think that prepared you to go to the other side, to the prosecution side? And what do you think motivated you to jump?
Well, I think definitely it was helpful. I mean, it could not have been helpful to approach it in a different way, to see defendants, people that are accused, as people.
There we go.
I mean, they're just people like everybody else, and some of them have things that brought them to the point that caused them to commit a crime. So, yes, in that regard, I think it was helpful. What caused me to change what I was doing? I preferred to do something that approached it from a different side. To work on behalf of victims, to work on behalf of public safety, and on behalf of my community, which is different than the role of a public defender because you're representing just an individual.
True. Yeah, both of them super valuable. I would never make fun of that too. So tell more about your career once you onboarded with the Commonwealth Attorney's Office. You've already indicated that Ray might have been a little more difficult to work for than
he wasn't difficult to work for, but he was a taskmaster for sure. I mean, he had high standards, and he expected us to abide by those standards. In fact, my husband Luke Morgan also worked for Ray as a prosecutor for a period of time, and so Ray had standards, and but they were all good.
They were.
All really, really good. We had to be on time. And he would be standing by the elevator when we got there. And if we were late, he would tap his watch.
Yeah, there we go.
I would have never survived there.
No, you wouldn't. Yeah, in more ways than one.
I know, you're right.
In more ways than one. Yeah, it was funny. I remember, and we'll get off the Ray thing in a minute, but people that listen to love Ray too. But he had, when I was up in the unit, he really didn't like plea bargains. I mean, his thing was let the community decide.
Yes, let's go to trial on murder cases, especially.
But I don't know if you remember. I don't think it was ever with you, but I will say this: that looking back, that I think there were 2 or 3 times where an assistant Commonwealth Attorney would invite me over to meet with Ray, and that's what the meeting was about. And I guess they thought if I was in the room, maybe it would edge the bet a little bit, or he wouldn't say no. It was actually kind of cute. And Ray would look over at me and look at them and say, "Yeah, we're going to trial." So it was, those are the things you remember. Well, talk more about once you onboarded and you got there. What was that experience like, and what kind of casework did you start with and end up doing?
Well, I was in the office for 35 years, so it changed a lot over the period of time. Started in 1987 and did just kind of routine cases, lots of drug cases. There are always a lot of drug cases in a prosecutor's office. Probably 30% of the cases that we have in the office are possessions or drug trafficking cases. And then when you throw in the cases that are tied to alcohol or drugs, like thefts and forgeries and things like that, it goes up a lot more. So doing those kind of cases, and then over time, with experience, started doing more serious cases, including sexual assaults and homicides and things like that. One thing that while I was in the office, Ray really pushed me to do was child sexual abuse cases. And he just thought that was really important cases. And I guess I kind of think hopefully he thought I would be good for those kinds of cases, and really encouraged me, took me. In fact, he and I and some others went to Huntsville, Alabama, to a place where they had just started a thing called the Children's Advocacy Center.
Oh, wow.
The district attorney down there, a guy named Bud Kramer, started the Children's Advocacy Center concept in like 1989. And Ray wanted to know more about it. And so we got in the car and drove down there. And that was the beginning of our Children's Advocacy Center, the Bluegrass.
Yep, learned something there. I wasn't aware that was the history of that too. So a powerful thing and powerful work. I tell people all the time that that's an ugly that we don't hear about. And I've always said that, in my opinion, most people really don't learn how much of it we have unless they're seated on a grand jury.
That's true.
And then you walk out with your eyes opened. It's really horrific. Really commendable work for sure. Way too much of it. Way too much of it. By the way, too, just for the audience knows, too, we're talking about the Commonwealth Attorney's Office, which is in circuit court.
Yes.
So the crimes there are going to be of a higher level than what we in Kentucky would call district court.
Yes.
Which would handle the misdemeanors and things like that. So we're talking about.
We have 2 elected prosecutors in Kentucky in every county. Every county, and I think there's 120 counties. 120 counties. Each one has an elected county attorney who does misdemeanors, traffic, usually represents the fiscal court, juveniles, sometimes family court. So you have that person. And then there are 57 elected Commonwealth attorneys. And the Commonwealth attorneys represent the people in circuit court. And these circuits can be a single county like we have here in Fayette County or Jefferson, Warren, the bigger counties. And then out in the state, some of these circuits are 4 counties. So you've got a prosecutor that's got to travel to 4 different counties
there we go.
To work. And so that's kind of the idea of the circuit. Remember, that's what circuit judges did. They traveled the circuit to go from one county to another to hold court.
There we go. Cool stuff. A little tidbit of history there.
Yeah,
that people
how
don't
neat.
have
I
on
did
board
not
to
know
do,
that.
So our Commonwealth attorneys prosecute felonies after the cases are held or waived to the grand jury. And in Kentucky, everybody has a constitutional right to be indicted by the grand jury for a felony. It's in the Constitution, but an individual can waive that right, and the case can go straight to the grand jury without a hearing. That's the hearing we have in district court called the preliminary hearing or probable cause hearing.
Right. Did several of those too. Speaking of the county attorney, we'll give a shout out to Angela Evans.
Yes, she's our elected county attorney. She's been there since 2018, I think.
Yeah.
Is that right? No, 2020?
Yeah, 2020.
22.
Yeah.
Wow, time's getting away from us.
Yeah, I don't have a concept
Put her
of
in
time.
office longer than she's been there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, when you're married to Wendy, you lose the concept of time anyway because
It's just all that love. It just embraces you in the
Every day is a holiday.
Flow like sweet honey.
I had another 4-letter word in mind, but we'll leave that alone.
Yeah, we'll leave that out of it.
But I ran into her last week at the St. Patrick's Day Festival, and so hopefully I told her, I said, we got to get together and get to lunch. I'm interested to hear how she's doing with that. So the challenge is on the county attorney side of it too. So getting back to it again is we're in the deep end of the pool with the casework and everything. And you talked about how you worked your way into different case levels and sexual abuse. But since it's a true crime podcast that focuses on murder, do you still remember your first murder trial or case? I should say case. Cause
maybe you should ask her the one that stands
I should have
out.
looked that up before I came. I can remember my first death penalty case, and it was with Ray.
Okay, yeah.
It was William Bennett.
Okay.
He was charged with murdering Judge Angelucci's son, Joseph.
Right.
And Joseph was serving a involuntary hospitalization warrant on William Bennett. And as Joseph was taking him into custody, Bennett got his gun and shot and killed him.
I remember, yeah.
And so that was again, of course, a horrible circumstance. But that was my first death penalty case, and tried that with Ray in the old circuit court, which is now Limestone Hall.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it the old court building where the men's and women's restrooms were on separate floors. Yes. I remember I was at a grand jury one time and I got done and I said, hey, if y'all want to do an investigation, they said, what? And I said, find out whose idea it was to not have the restrooms on the same floor. So always leaving them on a high note.
That's right. I never go to an event over there and I don't think about some of the stuff that happened in that building.
Oh, it's packed full of history.
Yeah.
I mean, really, when you think about it.
It is.
And sat in there many a time out there in those little hallways with the marble floors and stuff like that. So,
well, I'm sure
it was the People's Court, though, Wendy. I mean, it would be nice to know that the judges used to sit out back of that courthouse, and when you walked into courthouse, you could talk to the judges. They were right there.
Yeah.
Just Judge Keller, Judge Grant, Judge Tackett, they were all out there. And now, of course, I understand the reason for security, but now the judges are on the back side of the courthouse. They come in the back way through a Sally Port, and we don't get to see them in that way. And I think you lose something.
Yeah, you do. You do.
When those things happen. Like I said, I understand it's for their safety and protection, but
yeah, a different time.
Yes.
Very different. I'm sure through all the years, David asked which was if you remember the first. I'm sure through doing so many of these, you probably have several that just still really stick with you, whether it was the sexual assaults on children or adult victims. How do you manage to cope with that? I'm sure, like I said, it doesn't go away. It just, do you, I guess you've had so many, and I'm not downplaying any one over the other, but I'm sure that's really stuck with you, some of those that you don't forget.
Some of them, yeah, you'd be surprised. David, you probably experienced this. I don't drive through Lexington on any given day that I don't drive by a place and think about someone died there.
Absolutely. 100%.
Or this happened there.
100%.
So yes, I mean, it's more of something that I don't think about, but then when an opportunity happens, I remember this happened at this corner, or this happened in this park. And
yeah, she's been in the car for years now,
times.
where I can look up and say, well, that was this, that was that. It just burns in your brain.
Yeah.
That stuff doesn't leave. So.
Well, and we always say, wonder like who lives there now. Likely they have no idea if it's like, been resold or re-rented. And I just think how crazy that would be to live in one of those places and not having known, because we've covered some pretty gruesome cases on here, and knowing the details, it's just like, wow, these people have no idea what happened in that house they
you're
reside
absolutely
in.
right about that. You're right
probably
about
better
that.
they don't.
Yes.
It's one reason we don't do addresses and things on the show.
Mm-hmm.
We don't go that specific. It's just not necessary. So good deal. So the first death penalty case, which by the way in Kentucky has been on the freeze thing for a while, based on the method and everything. I don't know if that'll shake loose or not, but not either here nor there for today. So moving forward, tell us more about how much more time you spent before you got to be the Commonwealth Attorney and to Ray the DA's place.
Well, we had a great prosecutor, and he's still there part-time in our office, named Mike Malone.
Yes, Mike.
Mike
big shout out to Mike.
Big shout out to Mike Malone. He was Ray's first assistant for many years.
Yep.
And then Mike retired, meaning he left full-time in 2006. He later came back as our Commonwealth's detective, and now he's an assistant again, so he can go to court. Because actually one of the death penalty cases that Mike tried back in the day, Halverson and Willoughby, is still working its way through the court system. And so we put Mike back on as an assistant Commonwealth's attorney so he could argue pleadings, motions in that case 2 years ago. So, But anyway, when Mike retired in 2006, Ray appointed me as his first assistant. And then that just meant that my primary job was to supervise the attorney. So at any given time, the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office in the last probably 15 years has had between 14 and 19 full-time assistant Commonwealth's attorneys. And so my job as first assistant was to supervise the prosecutors primarily.
Okay, cool beans. Neat stuff.
Yeah.
And again, Mike Malone, that's good that he's back. Now that makes sense because I stay in contact with a victim's son on the Leonard White case.
Right.
And I just took him a saddle a couple weeks ago, and he said Mike was actually out there at the farm, and they sat and talked for about an hour. That's how this is.
Yes.
These go on for decades.
They go on for decades. And you're right. He's also done some post-conviction work regarding go forth.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that one's still working its way through.
These cases don't end until the defendant is no longer with us.
That's true. Yeah, exactly. So fascinating stuff. Fascinating. Especially, like I said, because her son really talks highly of Mike. So, has a lot of respect for Mike, which I'm not surprised. We used to just give Mike a hard way to go because he had probably the nastiest disorganized office.
Wow.
I think
sorry, Mike.
Messy, not nasty.
No, not nasty.
Gosh,
but yeah,
David.
piles of stuff.
insulting.
Well, I'm not talking about hot dog relish and mustard. Could have been in there. But yeah,
he had his own way of organizing things. Let's just put it that way.
A very meticulous filing system.
Yeah,
so.
Sounds like it.
Yeah, those were good times. So good deal. So as the first assistant, then you're supervising other people. Yes. Do you have a role in hiring at that point? On
I have a input.
Okay, good.
Input.
Good, yeah.
And Ray was always big on if somebody left, he wanted you to find their replacement. Okay. People would move on, and he wanted quality people in there.
Sure,
and so I kept doing that until then he retired in 2016.
Yeah.
Which was a which was a good day for me, but it was a sad day for the community. And I know it was kind of a sad day for Ray too, because he loved what he did.
Oh yeah, I think that was he dealt with it. But I think that's probably the best way to put it. It probably broke his heart a little bit having to walk away from it.
And he had the Tuesday night, I believe it was, crime night, which was before we even started podcasting. So it was kind of like a live podcast.
At his office over there on Broadway?
At the library.
Later. Yeah, later. Yes. He started in his office, though.
Really?
Yeah, he had an office over on Broadway.
Yeah, I remember
that. Yeah.
I never went to one there. But I did go to the ones at the library. And he would, same thing as we do, bring on the detective that worked it. And it was just really so neat, and you could see he was
blood.
loving what he did. Blood. He was just beaming when he was up there talking.
So you get made, kind of like the mafia. You get picked.
She got made.
You get made.
I was appointed? Kindly appointed by Governor Bevan.
Okay, gotcha.
And of course, Ray was very encouraging to Governor Bevan to appoint me.
I have no doubt. That probably is a good light word for that too.
Yes, and so I was pleased to be appointed, and then I ran in 2018.
Gotcha. Let's talk about this then. When you got appointed, let's talk about women in that role in Kentucky. Was there anybody else at the time? Or
there were not many. Remember, I told you there's 57 circuits, so there's 57 Commonwealth attorneys, and I think when I got appointed, that made 9 women.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
So 8 or 9 other women out in the state had been elected Commonwealth attorney before I was, but I was the first here in Fayette County.
Gotcha. During this long career with being an attorney, did you see any changes in the system or the peers or anything with regard to women in the law industry? What was it like when you started? Was it?
Well, I'm an old now. It was 1984. It's hard to believe. It was 1984. There were a fair number of women in law school in 1984, actually, and but not many women judges. Okay.
True.
In 1984. So that was where I think many of us really felt it, being in the courtroom, being mistaken for non-lawyers. Sitting until the end of the docket when the judge would finally look at you and go, "Little lady, I didn't realize you were a lawyer. I'm sorry. We'll call your case now."
Ouch.
That wasn't in Fayette County.
Yeah.
That wasn't in Fayette County.
Okay.
That was out in the state. But so women judges is where I think have made tremendous progress.
I might be wrong, but here in Fayette County, it's kind of an overwhelming number.
Yeah, there's quite a few of them.
It's like there's been a coup d'etat.
Yeah,
and I ask that when people, because if you talk to women in the law enforcement industry, even as early back as the 80s and 90s, you'd be surprised in places the real difficulty that they have, and there still is some. I'm not going to say that it's rounded the corner, but there's people I work with now that when they came on with certain agencies, they were told the first day, you understand, I didn't want you here. And the fight starts from there. So I think it's improved, but still got some work to do. Especially with women in roles of authority or what we perceive as authority for sure.
Leadership.
Mm-hmm.
That's it for sure. Well, good deal. Where do we go from there? So you got the keys to the kingdom?
I got appointed. And it was an adjustment, obviously. I mean, I really enjoyed it. But being second in command is not the same as being in command.
True.
And I wasn't Ray Larson. And so I felt that it was, I should try to do it the way I wanted to do it. It wasn't better. It was just different. And so we made some changes. We never left the critical mission, that everybody gets treated the same under the same circumstances.
Right.
And so the critical mission always stayed the same, but the way that we did it changed a little bit. And those are some of the things that I think I'm most proud of during the time that I was there. Gotcha.
What are some of the programs that stick out in your mind before you were appointed and through your appointment that the office completed?
Well, when Ray was Commonwealth Attorney, this is perfectly understandable. This is no criticism of him. Because when we first started, when I very first started in that office, I think we maybe had 8 attorneys. And so everybody had to do everything. You had to do thefts and rapes and homicides. Thefts and child sexual abuse and homicides. And I can tell you that not every prosecutor is cut out to do sexual assault, domestic violence, and child sexual abuse. They're just not.
Right.
And those victims deserve a prosecutor that's cut out for the job if one is available. I mean, in smaller offices, you can't do that, but we could do it. And so we started a special victims unit, and we had, you volunteered for those positions. You weren't told, or as my staff said, you weren't voluntold to be on that team. You volunteered for that. And we had, and some of them are still there, but great people that wanted to do that job, whose hearts was in representing domestic violence victims, sexual assault victims, and children. And these are very difficult cases. They are emotional. They are very time-consuming, and sometimes the results are not great. So you just really have to have the heart and the stomach for it. And so that, to me, that was one of the really important things that we did, because victims deserve that.
For sure.
They deserve that, and had a great team. It ended up being sexual assault, domestic violence, child sexual abuse, and elder abuse, physical elder abuse, not fraudulent elder abuse, but physical elder abuse.
Yeah. We have a mutual friend in common, Matt Brotherton. Mm-hmm. And Matt, when we used to work together, when I was still up in investigations, used to say that sometimes the conviction may not be as important as the conviction of the people working with the victim. And of course, I've got so much respect for Matt that it goes through the roof. But the idea that we can't always control that end result. But
That's
what
right.
we can control is how close we can get to those people and offer them support, and maybe look at what it takes to move their life past that in the wake of all of that. What a great thing. That victim advocacy programs are the best thing since sliced bread.
Yes. Well, Ray started our victims advocacy program. In fact, we hate to keep going back to Ray, but he did so many good things. He got called to the Rose Garden at the White House for his work in victim advocacy and vehicular homicides. That was his other huge thing.
That's
vehicular
true, yeah.
homicides.
Yeah. I remember that too.
But that was, for me, that was a change that I made. It was different than Ray had done it, just different.
But it makes sense, because I'd say that on the defense team too, the same thing would apply. Is some defense attorneys would probably have a stronger lean on certain types of cases and get behind them, and it was the same thing in the police department. Is that different people, what they could do? I mean, for example, that people over in auto theft would run circles around me. It just because of the interest in it and the knowledge on it. So, and you're right. I think the victims deserve the best that we can give them on that. So what a good thing.
And then let's see. I like the other thing. A couple other things that I did that I thought were really helpful was. So, we talk about the way that things have changed a lot during time. And so I got elected in 2018. And in 2020, George Floyd was murdered.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So part of my tenure was during COVID, and also just during a time when there was a lot of unrest here in Fayette County, even.
Right.
I mean, and in Jefferson County and all over the country. But we felt it here, and a lot of something that I had been working on. I'd actually been working on it, but we actually pushed through on, and that was matters regarding what we call giglio, which is a way of making sure that prosecutors tell defense attorneys about problems regarding particular officers.
Yes.
Okay, and I say the word problems. It's really more about reports or complaints that have been filed against an officer regarding certain types of things that might be related to following policy, dishonesty, things like that. It's not because they drove their car home or out of county or something, but significant things that should be disclosed. Let me just step back and say I have the greatest respect for law enforcement.
Sure.
I wouldn't have done this work all these years if I didn't. But just like prosecutors, the police are people too.
100%.
And so when someone does something that calls their integrity into question, and it might have a bearing on their testimony, we need to tell that. That's not my position. That's the position of the United States Supreme Court.
Yes.
And the Kentucky Supreme Court. And so we established a very clear guidelines about contacting the police department and making a written request for that information and turning it over when it came. It was a heavy lift, but the police department was completely on board. They wanted that. They wanted to show the good work that they do.
Sure.
And wanted to, if there was a problem, they wanted to know where it was. And so that was, I'm proud of that. I feel that I don't like the fact that exists. Yes, I would like us to have meticulous prosecution and prosecutors and law enforcement. But like I said, we're people.
That's an understatement. Yeah. And George Floyd was probably the largest watershed movement in the history of American policing. We're in the middle of a historic period right now. I call it a renaissance, and those are not always pretty. And one thing because I travel a lot, and one thing I saw over the last few years too is that more prosecutors' offices did that. Yes. Where instead of waiting, you had to initiate.
We are on the right. Yeah. We're doing it. We are forward thinking. We're doing the work.
And in the end, it makes the industry better. I'm 100% because it's diamonds are made from pressure, and I'm a big believer that what's going on right now is that we're exorcising some of the last demons out of the industry. And I don't mean demons as in individuals, although I met a couple that might be. But what I'm getting at is that we're pushing. I think when we start doing those things, and they're painful. I can tell you for police body worn cameras, wearing them is painful because you have that first integrity thing, and then you learn that it actually benefits you in your job. Yep. That's the thing with body worn cameras. Is a lot of people,
happened during my term too. Exactly. Body worn cameras.
Once they get past that and they start getting the wins, they get that. But there's that initial thing of like, well, I should just be believed, and then we're back to reality. Well, we can't just.
Well, I think there's that level of accountability as well.
100%.
And it helps because not only is it always geared towards the officer doing something wrong, but if you have a suspect that's being, arrested who's saying one thing, that it's nice to have that camera to justify the truth. I mean, you can't lie with the camera. It's the truth. So regardless of whoever is at fault or not at fault or being justified or not justified.
It benefits both sides.
That's it.
It does.
We all win from that.
Yes.
So I think that was a good thing. And I think that I'm the first one who will say the industry continues to need work. And that's how we work on it, is we don't just say transparency, we make it transparent. And big deal. I'd be very proud of that too. Very commendable, very commendable.
Thank you.
Because I love the industry enough that I want to see it get better.
Yeah,
I'm passionately in love with it. What else you got?
Well, those are just to me. There's lots of other things.
There's lots more.
But those are the highlights for me. Oh, I will say that we really, again, different than Ray, not better, but really, broadened our crime victims collaboration with all of the agencies. Our office had always hosted a Crime Victims' Rights Week, and I brought in that to have everyone be able to highlight their program and recognize their victims. And that was the police department, sheriff department, county attorney's office, and the U.S. attorney's office, because these are all agencies that, we work with. And each of them have spectacular victims programs. The sheriff has Amanda Center and has done a lot for domestic violence victims. The police have really stepped up their victims advocacy. They have bilingual advocates on board, which I think is super helpful in this community. And of course, the U.S. Attorney's Office and the police and county attorney. So
right. Yeah.
So that was great because we got to include everybody in that. And like I said, not better, just different.
Mm-hmm. I love it. And again, less likely somebody will fall through the cracks.
Exactly.
And Sheriff Witt, she's driven that train on the domestic violence really well for a long, long time.
Right. And then one other thing I'm reminded of is just community involvement. So when I became Commonwealth Attorney, one of the things I said is you have to be involved in something in the community. We feel like we do community work because that's what our work is, right? We show up every day and we represent the community and public safety, but it was more like, I don't care what it is, but it's got to be something extra. So people did all kinds of things. Some people worked with Crime Stoppers. Some people did reading programs. One of my prosecutors coached Girls on the Run.
Oh, wow.
I mean, because that's things that you can do to encourage youth
Right.
discourages other bad behaviors.
Yeah, we won't rabbit hole. Maybe another night we'll come back. That's a huge thing that I'm pretty passionate about too, but you nailed it. I mean, you did summarize it, that if we're going to fix some of the violent problems we have right now, we got to
go upstream. I mean, that's
we do.
that's a
Yes.
little, I know that's the thing. And so one of the things I did was out of my own pocket and my husband's pocket, we bought really nice superhero costumes. I mean, did you know that like you can spend $300 on a the really expensive one was Thor.
Yeah.
The Thor costume was super expensive, but they look so good. And so I had my prosecutors all decked out. Again, they had to it was a voluntold sort of deal, but we had Batman, we had Wonder Woman, we had a police officer that was the Black Panther.
Okay.
We had the Captain America woman, Spider-Man. They love Spider-Man. And we would go to community, we and they would go to community events, and children loved it. Okay. Now, I know that Wonder Woman is not a prosecutor, and neither is Spider-Man a prosecutor, but they are forces for good.
Yes. Yeah.
And I just really felt that we all need forces for good in our lives, something that we can believe in and depend on.
Right.
And the prosecutors, I think, enjoyed it every bit as much as the children did. So that was goofy, I know, but something that I was really proud of. And I looked on Kimberly Henderson Baird's website recently, and I saw that they're still doing it.
Good,
How
good.
fun.
Yeah, because you can come off looking like a hammer too.
You can,
I mean, you
and
can
it
come
takes,
up with
let me tell you what, it takes a lot because, Spider-Man is a shorter man, and he has to wear leotards.
Yeah, there's a comfort level I wouldn't have.
So I'm thinking of you, David.
I think they're wanting you to come on board.
Yeah,
because we could always use a backup Spider-Man.
yeah, and people
He'll
would
do it.
people would need therapy probably if that would be something they couldn't unsee without medication and hypnosis probably too. So probably we'll pass on.
You know
being
what? The children
Spider-Man.
would love it. They
Yeah,
would,
probably
they
so.
would love you, and they're
Don't
not,
you worry,
they're not
I'll
looking
get
at
in there.
anything else but that mask. So.
Yeah, too funny.
So those are just some of the things that that I did as Commonwealth's attorney that I was proud of.
Yeah, and I
But
would be too.
it's nice, like you say, for them to see you all not in that role of always just prosecuting or always, a lot of people they think of that as a bad or a negative light. You're being
Sure.
prosecuted. And so it's nice to see that whole department coming out and doing something for children.
Well, this is our community too. I mean,
Yes,
we don't
you
just
gotta
work
live
here;
too.
we live here,
Yeah, man.
and we're going into communities. Many of these communities are communities that are experiencing violence, and we want them to know that we're with them. I mean, we want to help. We want them to live in a place where they feel safe too.
That's the whole name of the game, right? The whole name of the game, for sure. So how long total were you in that?
I was the Commonwealth Attorney for 6 years.
6 years.
6
Good deal.
years.
And so when did you depart?
I retired in 2022, and just as Ray had done for me, I wrote a letter to our Governor, Andy Beshear, and asked him to appoint my first assistant, who's Kimberly Henderson Baird, and he did. And Kimberly became the second woman Commonwealth's attorney and the first Black woman Commonwealth's attorney in the Commonwealth.
Wonderful person, too, by the
A
way.
wonderful person,
Wonderful
a great
person.
prosecutor. She also has a passion for child sexual abuse cases. And I'm just I'm very proud of her, and I'm glad for this community. She is running unopposed.
Yeah. I have no doubt about that. And she has done great. I mean, I can't see any burps or anything from now that I'm a consumer of police and justice services, right?
That's right.
We start consuming them too.
Well, I have to ask, what brought you to that point to decide to finally retire? What was it just kind of, it was approaching that, or did you wake up one day and say, I just kind of want to relax now? What
Well, I'm
brought
not
you there?
relaxing. I want to do, two things. One, Kimberly's been in that office for, my gosh, over 27 years, going on 30. She's to a point she could retire. What a tragedy that would have been for her to retire and not be
Yes.
Commonwealth's attorney, right? What a tragedy it would have been for our Commonwealth. this is a discussion for even another time and not necessarily on this show, but there is a huge lack of people of color in district attorneys' offices as elected district attorneys and prosecutors. And to me, that's important.
It is.
It's important. And so it would have been a tragedy for me to hang on in that job and Kimberly to retire when she has all the skills and to be Commonwealth's attorney. So that was one of my motivators. And then the other one is that, there's just some other things that I wanted to do. I'm from Oklahoma. That's where I was born. That's where my parents grew up. That's where my heart is. And I'm a citizen of the Osage Nation. That's where our nation is. And I wanted to be there. I wanted to be more involved in tribal government and affairs and to be more involved with my family, my extended family, who's all still there. So you can't do that when you're working full-time as a prosecutor, going to crime scenes at night,
right,
going to court still, and doing all the other things that are required of Commonwealth's attorney. So those things went into my decision to.
Hey, there's more to the story, so go find the next episode and listen.
The Murder Police podcast is hosted by Wendy and David Lyons and was created to honor the lives of crime victims, so their names are never forgotten. It is produced, recorded, and edited by David Lyons. The Murder Police podcast can be found on your favorite Apple or Android podcast platform, as well as at murderpolicepodcast.com, where you will find show notes, transcripts, information about our presenters, and a link to the official Murder Police podcast merch store, where you can purchase a huge variety of Murder Police podcast swag. We are also on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which is closed caption for those that are hearing impaired. Just search for the Murder Police podcast and you will find us. If you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe for more and give us 5 stars and a written review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download your podcasts. Make sure you set your player to automatically download new episodes so you get the new ones as soon as they drop. And please tell your friends. Lock it down, Judy.